friends. Welcome to Interviews, Voices of Our Herbal Elders. This is my opportunity to talk to some of my dearest friends, people who have not only influenced my herbal work, but also have had a major influence on the revitalization of American herbalism. Most of us began our herbal work around the same time, in the early 1970s and 80s, when herbalism was still mostly underground, a place where plants actually thrived quite well. I love hearing people tell their herbal stories of how they began their herbal work, who and what inspired them, their favorite plant and healing stories, and I felt that others would be interested in hearing them as well. In fact, I felt it was important to capture these stories before this generation of elders passed on, as we're all destined to
I know that I'm part of the earth. When I see the sunrise, I am thankful to be here. I am thankful.
My honored and beloved guest today is Dr. Christopher Hobbs. Dr. Hobbs is a fourth generation, internationally renowned herbalist, licensed acupuncturist, practicing clinician, a botanist, mycologist, and research scientist with over 40 years of experience in herbal medicine. Christopher has a doctorate from UC Berkeley in phylogenetics, evolutionary biology, and phytochemistry. He's a founding member of the American Herbalist Guild and has been a supporting member of the United Plant Savers since its founding over 30 years ago. Christopher is also the author of 22 books. Yeah, and they're all great books, including Peterson's Field Guide to Medicinal Plants of the Western United States, which was co-authored with Stephen Foster, and his latest book, Medicinal Mushrooms, The Essential Guide, which has been described accurately, I feel, as a masterpiece and the authoritative resource on medicinal mushrooms. And really, there's literally so much more that I could say about Christopher and all that he has accomplished and is still accomplishing in his lifetime as an herbalist. But it would take up this whole hour if I was to read it all. So for a full bio, please see our website. And you can also follow the link to Christopher's amazingly informative website. So Christopher, it is such an honor to have you join me today. You're one of my oldest, dearest friends, and thank you so much for taking this time.
I'm so happy to be here with you, Rosemary. As always, it's much easier online, isn't it, than flying up to Vermont? But not nearly as well. It's not as much fun, but it's still going to be fun.
Yeah, it's going to be totally fun, and I'd so much rather have you in here in my library or kitchen. But this is going to be good, and this means a lot of people can listen to us. So, I wanted to start by reading a quote actually from the Medicinal Mushroom book. I was thumbing through it today, and this little quote in the back really struck me because I think it really sums up who you are. It's called Gratitude. So, the opportunity to share my knowledge and experience and my love and passion for fungi and plants and the forests and meadows in which they live fills me with gratitude. These days, amid all the good and bad news of the world, I find myself more and more looking for the silver lining, the positive, the good, the bigger picture, and celebrating the progress we have made as a race. I contemplate what I can do personally to help, even if it's a minuscule piece in the giant picture of life. I think you've done more than a minuscule piece, but you definitely have really given so much of your life to the plants. And I know the plants have given so much to you as well. I know you have a really interesting history because you began your plant journey as a young boy. Do you mind sharing a little bit of that with us?
Well, just in a nutshell, my dad and his dad's brother were professors of botany, and my dad. When that's what really got me going on plants is when my dad wasn't an herbalist, but he was really a plant person, and he knew all the plants. And so we'd be driving around in the neighborhood or somewhere, and I'd say, "Well, what's that tree? Or what's that flower?" And he always knew every single one, and whether it was an ornamental plant, a wild plant, didn't matter. He just knew all the plants and trees. So that. And of course, I wanted to be like my dad, and I wanted to connect with him. So I I don't know. I just always have, since then was really got excited about plants. But even before that, I think I just had a natural affinity for trees, and I wanted to know what they were. I wanted to connect with them. And so that's on my dad's side. And on my mom's side, she was an artist and musician, but her mom, my grandmother, was an herbalist. And I've got a beautiful picture of her sitting at a table. And this really, I don't have that many pictures of her, but this is a beautiful picture with a big sprig of forsythia, yellow forsythia, which is a Chinese herb. My mom told me, well, she had a garden, she had an herb garden in Pasadena. She was the community herbalist in Pasadena. And then she took a trolley, a red line, down to Los Angeles and studied with a Chinese herbalist. And this was in the 1920s, I guess, and right around there. And I have some of her notebooks. And then her mom was a herbalist also, a community herbalist, but she was a lady lawyer from New York, and she moved out to the Wild West to Montana. And my mom told me that she became a tarot reader and and was an herbalist.
Oh, wow, that's
So
totally.
that and who knows where, past that, what my ancestors were doing. But I really think of how I've been thinking recently, and I've been thinking a lot about my lineage. And when I did medicine work down in South America, our shaman said, "You will see your ancestors." So basically, I did. I saw my mother and my father and my some other people that I knew, and then it just all these faces kept coming, and so I've been thinking about my lineage a lot, and people talk about past lives. Well, I look at it as not that my ego and my mind and thoughts and everything are out there, will be out there somewhere, but just that all my ancestors, they're in me. My grandmother is definitely in me because I really feel such a strong connection with her and the herbs
That's
and
amazing.
plants that she used for healing, and my dad as well. I really feel that he's in me. So I know all these ancestors are that I'm basically the current representative of my lineage.
We always talk about how the herbalism is passed down to the blood or the bones of the ancestors. Yeah, and that's exactly what you're talking about.
And we're the current representatives of our lineage, of our whole lineage. And so, one of the first things that, if you do medicine work of any kind, like with a traditional shaman, which I've been down to South America 3 times, once in the Amazon jungle with Jim Duke, and which was really an amazing experience. And he's, that was such a powerful experience for me personally, and it just opened up just the feeling of how important it is to represent my lineage now and really heal the lineage in the sense of if there's any forgiveness of our parents or any feelings that we have that aren't just love, pure love. And at the end of my first session, I just thought, and I've, my brother and I have one brother and my parents, I had some feelings about them that were not always positive, though they gave me so much, of course. But then at the end of the session, I just felt like this incredible love just all over, just radiate out. And I just thought, love is all that matters. There's nothing else. And that was really a powerful experience for me that's really stuck with me.
Wow, that sounds so powerful. Dr. Jim Duke is another one of our great elders, but unfortunately, I can't interview him because he's already passed on. So it was that incentive of so many of our teachers and our friends who are passing that I was saying that it's so essential that we capture these amazing stories that we all have. But I did want to say, Christopher, when you were talking about how love is, it all distills down to love. It reminded me of the last time I heard Dr. Jensen speak. So I heard Dr. Jensen when I was a young girl, like maybe in my early 20s, and he was talking about, fasting and, bowels and enemas and all these things that we do to keep our health. But when I saw him speak, like when he was in his 80s or early 90s, he just said it all distills down to love. His whole lecture was all about loving, and being in touch with the things that you're talking to. So you're in that place now where it's all about love. You've always, since I've known you, which I think has been close to 40 years actually, but you've always radiated such positivity and good health and love, really. It's really your essence. And I think you're just distilling that to be even stronger.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's plenty of weird things going on in the world, but and Raina, my partner, always says, well, there are a lot of that negative things or thoughts that we might have, and then people think, well, I have this or that ailment or whatever, but then she says, well, what do you want to create?
Yeah.
So that's a really good teaching that she's given me, is that don't spend too much time thinking about those negative things, but what do you want to create? And what we want to create is something really positive and really beautiful.
That's so beautiful. Thank you. So another thing I really love and respect about you is this amazing ability you have to weave your very scientific, brilliant mind with earthly wisdom and spirituality. You've just created this wonderful cauldron and weave these all so beautifully. I just was wondering how that is for you. Like, you have these very, can be very divergent interests, but they come together in this beautiful way. Even when you're teaching, you can inspire and, have all the chemical knowledge of the plants. And then you have these wonderful stories and folklore and that beautiful umbrella of spirituality that's everything is within. Can you share a little bit about how that is for you?
I'll have to say that I was very fortunate in my dad. I have my dad to thank again. When both my parents when they were young, and much of that generation were smoking and drinking alcohol. So my
Yeah.
dad was, drinking a lot and smoking cigarettes and everything. And then he eventually had to split up with my mom when I was about 15 or 16 because they just weren't healthy for each other. They were both had that propensity. So and then he met Maureen, my stepmom, who he stayed with the rest of his life, and they actually died about a week apart when they were in their 80s. So it was really just such a wonderful relationship, and he cared so much. They cared so much about each other, and so it turns out that my stepmom was a psychologist and didn't have any addictive potential or interests. So she was very moderate type of person, which was just perfect for him. But she started giving him LSD. In that This was in the early '60s to cure any craving for alcohol. And I still remember him
Yeah.
laughing in the next room, and I was going, "What is going on in there?" It was so funny for me, and I was 19 or something like that, and then, but he went through 2 or 3 LSD sessions, and he never drank again after that. And so this was the early time when people were using LSD for addictions and so forth, and studying that. And then he became a Zen Buddhist after that. So, and he ended up taking us to, which really influenced me. He had some books
Yeah.
there which I started looking at, and uh, and I'm not religious at all. I don't consider myself religious at all, and that's a long discussion. But I am very spiritual, and I always have been. And if I were someone said, "Well, what path do you follow?" It would be probably Tibetan Buddhism, and Pema Chodron are really a great teacher for me. But then my dad started taking us to Ojai, which wasn't very far, and Krishnamurti was there. And there was this rope around these trees, and Krishnamurti was standing in the middle of this square of ropes and just talking, and there were maybe 20, 30 people there standing around listening to him. And so my dad took us 4 or 5 times to see Krishnamurti when I was pretty young. And that really had a big influence on me as well. And he's been a big teacher for me my whole life. And then my early 30s, I had kind of a spiritual awakening. I started reading about Ramakrishna, and I read several of his biographies, and he really inspired me Ramakrishna was a big inspiration for me, even though, of course, he had passed in his physical form. But since then, I've had a very strong spiritual path. So I think that's always been with me. But then I've gotten in it kind of as a root digger, and I love being in the woods so much. So that's why I got into mushrooms. I always tell people, well, they say, well, why did you get into mushrooms? And I said, well, because I just love being in the forest. And if you go in the forest, you're going to see mushrooms.
Oh, yeah, I know that. You have a curious mind. It's childlike too, which is delightful. So I know that you've had this lifelong love affair with plants, but I'm wondering, is there any kind of moment that you can remember when the plants just called you into their world? Was there any like particular time when you just went, aha, here are the plants, they're calling me?
Well, when I was in my early 20s, I was spending a lot of time. I wasn't working much. I was kind of a hippie type. So I just was like house sitting for people, and I didn't really want to I didn't want to punch in and out of a job. So I was just living at the edge of the forest. And I was so inspired by learning the names of plants and studying them more closely. So I got the Muntz flora, the California flora, and I would just go spend a whole day just wandering in the meadow and in the forest, picking flowers, and then just taking my hand lens and just looking at the flower and trying to key it out, trying to understand what it was related, what that particular species was related to, and how all the families are related and the different genera. So I just spent day after day a lot of time in the forest and in the meadows, and of course, I did become very inspired by if you take time to key out a plant, you're sitting with one plant and looking very closely at it for hours and hours. So it's kind of like meditating and connecting to that plant. And I just did that so much over a number of years that I really felt like these are my allies. And I just felt such a strong connection to plants and trees. And since then, I've been kind of hyper focused on plants. And so that wherever I am, I'm always looking at the roadside of what plants are around, what trees are around, what shrubs are around, and I'm always checking in with them. And that's been kind of a lifelong habit. I'm always just mostly, when I'm with people, I'm always just like looking around to see, and I'll say, "Stop the car!" There's a red delphinium. We have to go and see that.
Oh, I remember that so well, Christopher, when you used to come with us when we do those plant lovers journeys, those early ones when we were in the school bus or with our school tours when we had the California School of Herbal Studies. And always we'd be driving along and all of a sudden Christopher would be hollering, "Stop the bus." And the whole bus would get out and there we would be looking at a plant and we hardly got anywhere. These were long journeys because of you, Christopher. But it was a delightful way to learn. I definitely remember, and I'm sure you still do that. So like a defining moment that you can remember when you thought to call yourself an herbalist or felt like you were an herbalist?
Oh, definitely. That's one of my favorite stories.
I'd love to hear it.
I met Ed and Sarah Smith in 1980 when they still had Herb Farm. Was their whole stock was in one closet, and Sarah was still making sprout bags. And I still remember her lying on the floor on her side doing leg lifts, and at the same time she was licking labels and putting them on 1 ounce bottles. I'll never forget that. She was just such a go-getter that she didn't want to just sit there and do it. She was doing leg lifts and squats and stuff while she was putting labels on the bottles. So I still remember that. But Ed and I, had a lot to talk about because Ed's pretty chatty and I'm very chatty. So we were talking a lot about herbs. And this was 1980 when they were in the small little house. And so one day Ed said, and I was living there for some 6 months, I think. One day Ed said, well, let's go up. We need to pick some Pipsissewa. So I said, okay, great. And so we drove up in the Cascade foothills. He knew where there were some big patches of Pipsissewa. which is a wonderful kidney herb to soothe the urinary tract. And so we were driving up there, and all of a sudden he got pulled over by a policeman. So there was a cop car behind us, and I guess he was going a little too fast or something, or maybe he had a tail light out or something. Who knows? But anyway, so the cop pulls us over, and he said, "Let me see your license." So Ed gave him his license, and then he gave him a ticket to fill out. And I saw it on the clipboard, and it said occupation. And so he wrote herbalist and on the occupation. And I went, wait a minute, you mean that's a profession? That was like one of the biggest aha moments in my life, really, because I just thought this is just what I love to do, but it's not really a profession. I mean, this is 1980 I'm talking about.
Whoa, that's a great story.
Yeah. So after that, I thought, wow, I'm an herbalist. That's my profession.
That's great. Christopher, I think I met you the first time up in the Applegate Valley, right at Ed and Sarah's. I seem to have this picture. You'll probably remember it better than I do, the story, but I seem to have this memory that we were driving up there on one of our early plant lovers journeys, and we had the school bus. And I just remember seeing you out in this big field. That's the memory I have the first time I met you. Do you have a better recall of when we met?
Well, we might have met up at Ed and Sarah's earlier, but what I remember in the big field was Kathy Cavill and I don't remember who, and Howard and Daniel probably were, and you were on the bus, and we were driving up to going up to Washington or Oregon, and one of the stops was in Rouge, where Gabriel was, and so we stopped at Gabriel's. What he was leasing or using this big, I don't know how many acres it was, but it was quite a large garden area. And he had a big truck of seaweed that he had just harvested from the coast. And he was so we stopped there and we stayed there for a couple of days, I think. And this is another really great story that I have in my mind that was a big aha moment for me. And this must have been 1981 or something like that. I don't know exactly what date, but certainly very early 80s. And so Gabriel, we were all out in Gabriel's garden, and he was talking with us about the garden, and we were all there. And so he pulled up a carrot, and he said, and then kind of brushed it off and started eating it. He said, "This is the medicine." And that really, I know it's nowadays we think, okay, yeah, food medicine, everybody knows that. But in 1980, that was another big giant moment for me that oh yeah, the garden, everything that's growing in the garden, that's the medicine right there. It's right from the earth and it's right from the garden. And he's so much embodied that anyway, as you know. He just embodied that the garden is the medicine. And that was just such a huge moment for me that I'll never forget. So Gabriel was my teacher at that point, and just as Ed was when he wrote down herbalist on the ticket, those are two really important moments. But I'm pretty sure that's the first time, and certainly we were out in the big garden there of Gabriel early on in 1980, maybe it was. I don't know, but I think that's what we met.
It was like that 1980 or 1981. And, you're speaking about Gabriel Howard, who's just had such a major influence on organic farming and herbalism and seed saving in this country. Unfortunately, he's also another one of the elders who's passed on. And then Sarah and Ed, who you were talking about, I did do an interview with Sarah already, and we'll be doing one with Ed soon. So, and he's such a good storyteller. So, yeah, and it's what you were talking about with the carrot. These things just seem so common. They're thoughts everybody has now, but not at that time. And that's what makes these stories so incredibly empowering. Is it's tracing where we are. So you've mentioned two of your really early teachers. I know you've we studied with so many different people and studied just being with them and having them as friends. Is there anybody in particular a teacher who really influenced your path as it is today? Anybody that?
Well, first of all, my dad was my first teacher,
Yeah.
obviously. And after that, when I left home, my mom was a Seventh-day Adventist,
Oh,
and so they would, they really, my mom was really focused on healthy food, so she would always cook a meal that was pretty, we didn't have processed food so much then, so it was always a very wholesome meal, and but then when I left home and I went into the Army, actually, I don't know if you know that about me, but I was in the Army for 2 years. I was drafted. And then I got out as soon as I could. I wasn't really a military type of person. Um, so when I got out of the Army, then I went off and I heard Country Joe on the radio. I heard Strawberry Fields and I heard Country Joe say LSD, and so I thought, oh, that's for me. I want to because I grew up in Southern California. I want to go up to the Bay Area and be a hippie. So I did. I went up there, and then after about a year, I started eating hamburgers and candy, and I just kind of let my I I was rebelling against the way I grew up. So I was eating all these hamburgers and candy, and I still remember I started feeling weaker and weaker, and I started feeling really bad, and I couldn't hardly walk up this hill without huffing and puffing, and I thought something is definitely wrong here. I've got and then I went to visit my mom. She lived in Palm Springs, and so I thought, well, I'll go to a health food store. There was a old-time health food store in Palm Springs. So I went into the health food store, and there was a book right there on the rack by Paul Bragg. So I just went, oh, Paul Bragg, it was The Miracle of Fasting. And so I thought, well, I wonder, I didn't know much about fasting at that point. So I got his book, and he's so enthusiastic about fasting and health and it's a whole program. He always used to say, well, anyway, so I read his book, and then I found out he lived part of the year in Desert Hot Springs, which is right near where my mom lived, just one little town over. So I went over and I, knocked on his door and I said, I've got your book and I want to study with you. And he goes, no, I'm traveling all the time. I don't have time. So then but I came back 2 or 3 times and finally said, okay, you can travel with me. I'm going to do a talk in LA next week. So I went with him and I listened to his talk and somebody asked him, well, what'll I do for arthritis? And he goes, he went, Dears, I have no specifics for you. It's always a total program for health.
oh,
And so that was another big
that's
teaching for me. And
powerful.
of course, I read his book and I did a lot of fasting in those days, like weeks of, one time I fasted for 2 or 3 weeks. And so that was a big turning point, another big turning point in my life. And then I got even sicker after that because I was cleansing. Of course, I was eliminating a lot of stuff. But eventually I started feeling better, and then from then on, that was my healthy diet for the rest of my life, basically. Then, after 1980, I mean, every herbalist I met was my teacher. You were my teacher,
Yeah.
and for just so many things, and especially your big open heart, but so many others. Cascade, I learned a lot from Cascade. I remember walking one time up in Portland. I lived in Portland for a couple of years, and Cascade and I were pretty close. And one day we were walking out in the forest there on the river, on the big river, and
Columbia.
through the woods. And we were doing a talk at the Northwest Herb Conference together, and so I started coming down with a runny nose and a scratchy throat, and I was feeling bad. And I said, Cascade, do you have any? And we're walking along next to the river in the woods there. And I said, Cascade, do you have any echinacea on you? And she said, echinacea? Why do you need echinacea? There's wild ginger growing all over around here. So she pulled up a little wild ginger, and we started chewing on wild ginger. And yeah, my cold got so much better. And then I started reading that it was a Chinese herb for the immune system and for my throat and respiratory tract. So Cascade, that's just one example of, Cascade, a teaching that she had. And then we started going to conferences together, Brighton Bush, and so obviously all the herbalists were all learning from each other at that time, and so pretty much David Winston, David Hoffman, Eddie, all those herbalists were all teachers for me. We were learning a lot from each other.
Yeah, totally. I so agree. We were all learning from each other and creating family and community together as we were learning. It was a really remarkable time and still is. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Cascade. She's also another one of our beloved herbalist elders who have passed on. But thankfully, Elliot is publishing her husband is publishing a book about of her work. So that should be available. We will have at least we'll have all of her classes and her teachings still available. Christopher, I
Wonderful.
love these stories. I've learned. I feel I've known you half my life, and we've talked so often. We're so close, but I've learned so much just in this one story that you told. One is I never knew your mother was a Seventh-day Adventist. I was raised as an Adventist as well. My mother and father were also Adventists.
Oh,
So yeah, that
I didn't know that.
I probably had. Yeah, I know. It's like when you said that, it's like so that got us started off on a very, very good diet for sure. And then I really never knew about that little short time you spent in the army. I have to agree that you don't really seem like the army type, but there's always something to learn everywhere, right? And yeah, so many good stories. I definitely don't remember the story with your first teacher, Dr. Bragg. I mean, he was amazing. So
Yeah,
yeah,
he really
all such
was.
great. Yeah, I just read his books like you did. I never knew that you went knocking on his door. Yeah, great stories. So, yeah, I was wanted to ask if you have a favorite plant story. I know you have a zillion of them, but if you could share with us just another favorite plant story of, a plant that you love or.
I don't know how to pick one out. There's so many that just pop up in my mind. As you have, I've taught hundreds of plant walks, so those are probably the best stories that I have. Just people that didn't that weren't too familiar with herbal medicine or herbs or plants, and they're so curious and excited about learning more about the plants. And we've led so many plant walks, and some of the best stories I have are just students stories of getting to know, like wild ginger. One of the stories, which I've got so many, as I said, but one that pops out in my mind is that I was teaching up in Nevada with, and actually at a conference, a week-long conference, and Black Elk was there, and some other teachers were there, and I was leading an herb walk, and there was this man on the walk that every herb I talked about, he would just pick kind of a double handful and eat the whole thing. So I said, well, here's yarrow, and I was talking about yarrow. So he picked there was lots of yarrow around. He picked like 3 or 4 leaves of yarrow and a flower, and he was just like munching on it and eating. He wasn't just munching on it and tasting it. He ate this whole handful of yarrow. And then we were walking along, and I said, well, this is desert parsley, which is pretty harsh. And he'd pick a handful of the
Yeah.
seeds and flowers, and he would just eat the whole thing. And then pretty soon I said, well, we around the conference center, there was some poison hemlock. So I said, well, this is poison
Oh,
hemlock. And I told the story about Socrates, and that the seeds and were the most, and the roots are the most toxic, especially in the summer and fall. And in the spring, they're not as toxic. So he was picking the foliage of the poison hemlock and just eating handfuls of the poison hemlock.
oh
And I'm
no.
just going, yeah, I just said, I don't know if that's a good idea. Or, he was just eating the poison hemlock and some other herbs. And the next day he was fine. He didn't experience any. So I don't know, that was kind of after that, I started eating more plants. Every time I'd, see yarrow or something, I'd eat 2 or 3 leaves, and just to experiment and bring the medicine into my body without having to make a tea or, and I still do that. I still go out in my garden and I'll eat some thyme, or I'll eat some oregano, or, whatever. So that was kind of but like you, I've got lots and lots of stories like that.
I always like to, taste with all, get to know the plant with all my senses as well. Just a little bite, like when I'm out in the woods or whenever I smell it and look at it. And one time when I first moved to New England, I was on a walk and there was plants here that I wasn't as familiar with for certain because it was a new habitat for me. I saw this plant, I sort of recognized it, but I didn't know exactly what it was. And I was on a family walk, it was just with friends and I was behind everybody and I took a nice big bite of it and it was the most acrid, bitter flavor. I mean, it was one of those times I'm looking for chickweed, I'm looking for sassafras leaves, anything to like mellow the flavor. It was celandine, right? it was
Oh,
it was it was
yeah,
a
that's harsh.
yeah, that one was pretty harsh. but yeah, I'm surprised. Sometimes the leaf of the hemlock actually can make people nauseated. It's not poisonous, but yeah, it's a
And well, then another couple of quick stories are one time, a couple of things another things that pops up in my mind. One time I was with Michael Tierra and out in, because we did two or three backpacking trips in the early days with Paul Lee's school. And
oh
we
great.
took students out in the High Sierra. And so we saw some Aristolochia snake root, which is the most bitter herb I've ever tasted in my whole life. And I just happened to have some with me. So I was taking drops of it just to because I was experimenting with it to activate my immune response because it is a very powerful immune regulator. And so we saw it, and we were talking. I was talking about it, and I said, "Oh, I just happen to have some tincture of it," and I took the dropper out, and Michael said, "Let me try some," and he took a whole dropper full of it, and he squirted it in his mouth, and that I've never seen him react like that before. He just went, "Oh my God, that is horrible." So I remember those types of stories. But then the other one that I really enjoyed is I was up on another backpacking trip and up in the very high mountains, and there was a lot of this yarrow around that was kind of a purple yarrow because of all the ultraviolet it had from up there, and it was a polyploidy. So some plants like yarrow and valerian double their genome and they create polyploids. And so they double or even more, they amplify their genome up in the high country because the ultraviolet will cause their genome to
Oh,
double in
really?
the next generation. And so there was this very special yarrow up there, high mountain yarrow that was really dark purple and really dark and big, stout. And so we made sun tea. We picked a lot of the yarrow, we put it in hot water and left it out in the sun for quite a few hours in the hot sun, and then shook it up. And I drank quite a bit of it. I drank like a half a quart of it, and pretty soon I started hearing sounds. I started hearing bells, like a Tibetan bells or something. And I was going, wait a minute, this is really strange. And I had to lie down. I started to get really dizzy. And I started to see like these colored dots floating around. But mainly it was just like all these sounds of music and bells and everything. And that lasted for about a half an hour. And I thought, there must be hallucinogenic properties of really super high mountain polyploidy yarrow. And since then, I actually read a couple of studies on it that there are some compounds that are slightly mind altering. So that was a very interesting
Oh, so
story.
fascinating. Yeah, so fascinating. Kind of rather totally amazing. So, Christopher, I know you've also been a practicing clinician as well, and have a practice. And I'm just wondering, is there any particular story that jumps out of a time when you saw herbs? I know this again is one of those questions because there's so many, but just a story that might pop up of a time when you saw a plant kind of work a miracle, something really amazing that you'd like to share with us.
Well, it's not so much one case, that one dramatic moment. It's like having a practice when I had my clinic in Santa Cruz, and because I had hepatitis twice when I was young, once from going overseas, and another time I don't know I picked it up when I was 19 in a restaurant somewhere in Southern California. It was infectious hepatitis, not hepatitis C, fortunately, or B, but it was infectious hepatitis. Terrible experience, but anyway, I had it twice, and so I was very interested I got interested in the liver and liver health, and I started reading the scientific literature at UCSC Science Library. This is very early on in the 70s, or even 60s, the late 60s, and so I started reading that milk thistle was an herb that in Europe and in Germany they were using for hepatitis and for promoting liver health. And this is literally in the 1968, I think. And so then
Really?
I was, yeah. And so I went over to in the East Bay, in the Bay Area, and I noticed that I knew that there was milk thistle growing all over the place. Spiny heads and purple flowers, and the leaves with the milky bands on them. That's why they call it milk thistle. Supposedly, it's Mother Mary's milk dripping on the leaves. And so we started harvesting the spiny heads with gloves, and we let them dry out, and we shred them in a shredder, and then we poured it down into a fan to get rid of the fluff, and we collected the seeds, and then we made extracts. And this was in 1968. And when no one had really heard of milk thistle. And so I started using it. My digestion was not very good at the time. So I started using a lot of milk thistle in water. It would turn cloudy because of all those active compounds. And my digestion started getting better and better, and I was feeling really good. And and then I had a liver panel, and my liver enzymes were really low. And I thought, wow, this is a really powerful medicine. So I wrote my little book on milk thistle, the liver herb, and that was in 1968. Or
Good.
1969, and that was the first little booklet that I wrote. And then when I had my clinical practice in Santa Cruz, I had a lot of. Then I wrote a book called Natural Therapy for Your Liver, a little book.
It's a great,
Just describing how
good
to use
book.
milk thistle and other liver herbs. And so I had all these patients that had hepatitis that would come to my clinic. And at one time I had over 100 patients with hepatitis. And I made formulas, but one of the main parts of the formula was milk thistle. And then I would give them my little book, How to Take Care of Your Liver. And they were getting liver panels and also they had hepatitis C. A lot of my patients had hepatitis C, and in those days they didn't have a real cure for it like there is now, and so it was always a total program. But it turned out that looking at the numbers, the viral loads came down, people's liver enzymes came down. So I literally saw many patients that where their liver enzymes and their viral load came way down when they were taking a lot of milk thistle. So I was
That's,
really dazzled by milk thistle, and that's always been one of my really favorite herbs.
I love that. Dazzled by milk thistle. It is an amazing herb. It's so common, much more common on the West Coast than out here. We can grow it, but it's actually not happy in the Northeast. But on the West Coast, all along that whole Pacific Northwest, it's just abundant. And even as a wild food, it's delicious, It's such a great herb. But yeah, I know you did so much to bring it forward in this country. Another thing that's so interesting about milk thistle is that in the European hospitals, they keep the extract in hospitals because people do so much more mushroom identification there, So it's what is it? This silymarin in the mushroom, I think, in the extract they use as I think they need to start keeping it here. And I always have it on hand because my husband Robert and we love to go out mushrooming, and I just keep it just in case. I think it's smart, don't you?
Yeah, for the because Amanita phalloides, the death cap, it's a weed in North America, but it's spread all over the West Coast
Yeah.
under oaks, and every year there's at least one or two poisonings with death caps. Europe, many poisoning cases because they're so popular over there, but yeah, milk thistle is the main herb to use.
it's the main medicine that's known really to help cure that. Matthew, have you ever heard Matthew Wood's story about his friend who, I forget her name, but Susan, who ate some amanita and was really, really ill, and he was giving it to her on the way to the hospital. And when she got there, she was still sick, but she definitely recovered. And the doctors even say it was because Matthew was giving her that milk thistle extract all the way to the hospital. It's a pretty
Right.
remarkable. It's a great one.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good story too.
I wanted to mention that it's not so much about herbs, but it's about you're also this collector of rare herb books. Like that's another thing that you've done is you've amassed an incredible collection and resource, right, of thousands of books. I know whenever you'd come to visit me, there was that really neat old bookstore. You and David used to try to get there so you could get there first to get the
That's
herb book.
right.
But I know you use it as a resource. What are your plans? Do you have any long-term plans for your library?
Well, it was David Winston and Bob Bruscia, my herbalist friend, and that lives up here in Placerville, and I were the three main herbalists that were just book crazy. It's like Erasmus said, famous quote. He said, "If I get a little money, I buy books, and if there's anything left over, I buy food and clothes." So we were kind of like that. We just couldn't help ourselves. And then remember, in those days, in the 80s and early 90s, we didn't have the internet. We didn't have all this information that we have available now. And in the 80s, there were only a handful of really great herb books, maybe. So
Oh
we,
yeah.
we just wanted to collect books. I ended up collecting 8,000 books, which is going
Well,
overboard. I agree. I'm really realizing that now. But it was sure great stories of going over to England with David and Bob and collecting all these wonderful herbals and garden books. And I learned so much about the people, the doctors, and the even midwives that used herbs and wrote books, and so that was a really important part of my life. But now, we don't need the book so much because, well, for me, my teachings are more now are different than just facts. I don't really focus on all the chemistry and pharmacology as much anymore. Now it's really just about the more spiritual and energetic side of healing, with plants and foods. Uh, as you know, you've been there the whole time, but I've really have come more and more over to that side of healing,
hmm.
and I have enough information in my head. I don't need any more information really. So we're cutting
Yeah.
the books and scanning them, and we have a nonprofit called the worldherblibrary.org, and we're putting them all up. We have about 300 books up so far, and so you can go on to the worldherblibrary.org and you can search all of these 300 books for, say, thyme or oregano or whatever you want, and it'll show you all the different occurrences in these books. And then you can open up the book and you can turn the pages. It looks like the real pages are turning, or flipping. It's kind of
Oh my
three-dimensional.
goodness.
So we're offering all that to the world. And so that's what we're doing
Is
with
that a
our.
free
I'm
resource?
just basically the last year we've been working on this, and so I'm offering these books to the world. We don't want to break up our libraries and sell them. We want to give us. Of course, some of them can't be cut and scanned, like the old herbals and so forth. But
Yeah,
many of them, I think around 60-70% of them, are we're going to cut and scan and digitize, so you can search them, you can look at them online,
that's
and
beautiful.
that's our project that we're doing now.
That's a wonderful project, Christopher. That's so awesome. Another great gift that you're giving to the world. Yeah, so we're kind of running out of time, but there's a few more things I wanted to ask. And one is if you were to oh, I think I did ask you if you had one favorite plant. I bet that was the milk thistle, right? Was that the milk thistle story? If you had one favorite plant, like if you had to choose one plant that would be your plant ally, is there anyone particular that jumps up? I know it's so hard. I can hardly do that.
No, I'm asked that like you are probably as well. I just don't. I can't think in those terms because I really. Yeah. The, can I tell a quick story? I was, Rainey and I
Yeah.
were um, in at Wilbur Hot Springs about 3 months ago, and in Wilbur Hot Springs there are these beautiful baths, and it's way, way, way out in the wild, not near a town. And so we wanted to do some medicine work together. And so we went to one of the camping sites, which has a platform there. This was a really profound experience for both of us. And so, and we're all wrapped around where the plants and some of my favorite plants and trees and the ancient blue oak forest. And we were just, and then we didn't eat that morning. We purposely didn't had a very light breakfast, and then we went up there about 10 o'clock, and it was sunny and blue sky, but it was kind of wrapped all around by the plants and trees, and so we brought some rocks and we brought a few plants in, and we spent a long time setting an intention for our journey, and then Rainey is so good at setting intentions and has just beautiful words for prayer. And so I really thought about my allies, the trees and the plants as my allies, and that they're always there with me. And so I started thinking about the blue oak, and the Indian warrior was there, and some other of my favorite plants, the lomatium, desert parsley. And I just started really making just a really beautiful connection and gratitude with those plants and trees that are such an important part of my life. And I really started thinking of them, these are my allies that I can call. I've just spent so much of my life connecting with them that I really felt like I can call those my allies in. And so for our medicine journey, I called my allies in, and we had a sprig of desert parsley, and we had a sprig of blue oak, this is the ancient blue oak forest that we were in, um, and and we had just such a beautiful experience with our medicine work, and I just felt all my allies around me, and it was such a beautiful experience. But my point being is that I can't really pick out one herb because it's all of the plants and trees that I love so dearly, and wherever I go, Europe or wherever even South America, the Urubamba Valley, my allies are there. They're always there. It may not be the same species, but it's going to be Galium and it's going to be Quercus and all these other beautiful trees and plants. And I just this medicine opened me up so much to this connection and love that I have with the plants and trees, allies, and it was just such a beautiful experience.
Oh, I can feel it. And I know just what you mean. It's that deeper connection. Like it is incredible to learn, all the science and the chemical constituents and how the plants work physiologically in the body. And that's, that in itself is a marvel. But when you really get into the spiritual relationship with the plants, it's when they really start exploding inside of us. And I think that's what you're speaking to, just that incredible connection and relationship we have with this amazing green world around us. The
That's
plants,
the
and
medicine.
that's the
And
medicine.
same with food. If we go out
Yeah.
in our garden and we pick the carrot or the tomato out there, and it's just so
Yeah.
so much our medicine.
I remember one time, Christopher, something that I read or I heard you saying was about a time that you had a really bad cold and you didn't have your herbs with you and you were wondering where the herb shop was. And then you walked into a grocery store and you found everything you needed in the produce department. Do you remember that time?
Yeah, I do. I did a reel on that, and I made a video from my University of Massachusetts course. I teach a 4-unit herbal class at University of Massachusetts for the last 5-6 years, and I have an intro video, and I show I did the whole video and everything, and I was at Whole Foods in Texas, the largest Whole Foods in the world at that time. I was going to do a class the next morning, but I started getting this really bad cold, sore throat, runny nose, felt really bad, and I thought, well, at Whole Foods, there's bound to be a medicine here somewhere. And so I walked down the aisle, and there are these big, tall aisles, and you know how it is in Whole Foods or some of those big markets, and there are just like hundreds of supplements on both sides. And I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, which one is going to be the best, really? And then I passed a break in the aisle, and I saw the produce department over there, and I thought, well, wait a minute, what's over there? And I walked over there, and there was garlic, and they had bundles of thyme and oregano, and I just thought, well, here's the medicine right here. Why do I need any of those pills or tablets? Here's the medicine right here. And so I just got some garlic, and I got some thyme and oregano, and I brewed the thyme and oregano up in the coffee maker in the room. Tastes a little bit like coffee, and I drank a few cups of that, and I crushed some garlic and put it on my dinner, and the next morning I felt great.
Yeah. Such a good teaching. It's such a good teaching. Yeah. That realization that, the medicine is all around us and in our kitchen. I think that's the reason that fire cider became so popular. All the formulas I've made, that one there has just become worldwide, but it's because it was really a grocery store in a jar, right? It was all those healing plants. So, Christopher, you have really accomplished so much in this lifetime, from all the teachings. I mean, it's amazing, all the places that you teach. You're still doing classes at Yale and Stanford and, and Massachusetts, and then all of the herbal conferences worldwide, and the books you've written, which are just wonderful books, by the way, and then all the herb walks that you've led. And it's just in all the people that you've helped with one-on-one. And of all of these things, what is the thing that you feel the proudest of, that gives you the most pleasure when you look back, or look forward? What are the things that you feel the best about?
Well, again, it's not one thing, but there are some big turning points of my life, maybe 4 or 5 major turning points in my life. But one of them definitely was my dad had a doctorate. He was a PhD in botany, and his dad before him. And so I always wanted to get a PhD. I always wanted to get more science training. And I waited a long time because I was just so restless. So when I was older, I just had the opportunity. We moved to Davis. I started at UC Davis because my undergraduate degree was in art history and music. So I had to get a whole new science degree for 4 years, and then so I went to UC Davis, and then I did some work also at Sac State. But I got my undergrad degree, and then it turns out that I saw that at UC Berkeley they had a noon lunchtime talk, and so a friend of mine said, "Well, you should go and talk about native plant medicine there." So I went over, I emailed them, and they said, "Sure, come on over." And it's all the professors, and would get together, and people in the department there, the botany department or integrative biology. So I went over, and I had my Peterson guide, and I started talking about local native plants, and then I told them, "Well, I'm going to apply for graduate school and at UC Davis," and they said, "Well, you should apply here. We like what you were saying." So I did apply to UC Berkeley and met my major professor, Bruce Baldwin, who was just an old hippie and deadhead himself, which was really interesting. He was one of the main botanists in the UC Berkeley department there. And so I went, 7 more years of hard science training, a lot of genetics, a lot of ecology. It was called there, it was integrative biology. So chemistry, ecology, evolutionary biology. And I did a lot of lab work and, traveled all over collecting plants. And and did a lot of math, a lot of intense math and science, and then I finally ended up graduating. But a lot of people ask me, well, why do you spend all that time getting all that science training? And what was the most important benefit from doing all that 10 years of hard science training? And I said, well, and I just thought, and I realized that what I learned was, and the most valuable is not all the knowledge and the facts and chemistry. It was just that I know nothing. I know absolutely nothing. This world is so
Oh, yeah.
miraculous and so mysterious that I absolutely know nothing.
I
That's what
love
I learned. I unlearned everything that I thought I knew. And not only that, but it taught me great flexibility of mind. So
Oh,
those were so valuable for me, and I still have them with me. And that is that I just feel like flexibility of mind and admitting. And Sadhguru, which is one of my teachers now, always says, "What's wrong with just admitting we don't know?" And so I really feel that it's so important to admit that we don't know so many things. And when we make a decision about something or we think we know something, we're closing our mind. So that's what
yeah.
I learned after all those 10 years, is that I know nothing. It's so miraculous.
That's so brilliant, Christopher. Just so brilliant. I know those were really hard years too. You studied really hard. Every time I saw you, you were like studying and just working so hard. But what a brilliant conclusion to come to. And I had a couple other things I wanted to ask you, but that is such a beautiful place to end and to just for all of us to just receive. And I want to just thank you for everything that you've done for plants and mushrooms and people in this earth. You really have given your life in service, and your light and vitality is just beautiful. You're definitely a radiant elder for sure. So thank you, Christopher, for sharing your stories and just being a part of this wonderful session that we're doing with interviewing the elders. I really so appreciate you and love you dearly.
We're doing it together, Rosemary, and it really has been a group effort, and our community, our herbal community, of course, is one of the greatest gifts of our life, and it's still going on. And so I just honor you so much for your lifetime of service as well, and the just beauty of being in community together has been so precious.
Yeah, it certainly has. I always say that, I love plants with all my heart. And I'm so glad I was called into service to them when I was young. And I also love the people that love plants. I just think they're some of the most gifted, brilliant, heartful, compassionate, and hardworking people on the planet. So thank you, sweetie.
It's really true, Rosemary. But the last thing I want to say is that I really just believe that I'm just a channel, and so what we're all, once we connect to the plants and the trees and nature, we're just purifying and clearing our channel, and then we get to channel it, and we don't own it. We're just channeling it through, and we don't, we can't take credit for it really. It's just coming through, and we're working on honing and clearing our channel. So I really do believe that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you,
I am
Rosemary.
thankful